When a bitter divorce left her with nothing but a shattered ego and a meager cash settlement, she bought a crumbling, forgotten mansion just to escape. She thought she was purchasing a simple fixer-upper. She didn't know she was buying a mafia graveyard and a secret worth millions. Evelyn Mercer sat in the sterile, glass-walled conference room of a downtown Manhattan law firm, staring blankly at the divorce decree. After 8 years of marriage, her husband, Henry Hayes, a ruthless corporate litigator, had systematically dismantled her life. He got the luxury penthouse, the investment portfolios, and the mutual friends. Evelyn walked away with a bruised spirit, her maiden name, and a final cash settlement of $180,000, a calculated insult from a man who earned that much in a month. She needed to disappear. The city felt suffocating, every street corner, a reminder of the life she had lost. For weeks, Evelyn scoured real estate listings, looking for something far away, something she could mold with her own 2 hands. She wanted a project. She needed a distraction from the crushing weight of her failure. That was when she found it, 742 Bellwether Road. Located deep in the heavy forested foothills of the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, the property was listed for a staggeringly low $115,000. The photographs showed a sprawling 3-story Victorian-style mansion swallowed by decades of overgrowth. Ivy choked the brickwork, the wraparound porch sagged under its own weight, and the windows were boarded up like blind eyes staring out into the wilderness. Evelyn drove up the following Tuesday. The real estate agent, a nervous, balding man named Arthur Pendleton, waited for her in the overgrown driveway, anxiously checking his watch. "I have to be honest with you, Ms. Mercer, Miss Arthur," said, struggling to unlock the rusted iron front doors. "This property has been sitting empty for over 40 years. The bank foreclosed on it back in the late 70s. It's got history." "I like history," Evelyn replied, tightly, stepping into the grand foyer. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood, ancient dust and decay. A grand mahogany staircase spiraled upward, its banister cracked and splintered. Faded floral wallpaper peeled from the walls in long curling strips. But beneath the rot, Evelyn could see the bones of something magnificent. "Who owned it?" she asked, running her hand along a dust-caked fireplace mantel. Arthur cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "A man named Dominic Vetty. He was connected, a prominent figure in the Lucchese crime family, serving as a loan shark and an enforcer. They called him the Ghost because of how easily he could make people disappear. He bought this place in 1968 as a summer retreat. But in the winter of 1978, Vetty himself disappeared, walked out of a diner in Brooklyn and vanished off the face of the earth. The feds tore this house apart, looking for him or his money, but they found nothing. It's been abandoned ever since." Evelyn stood in the center of the rotting parlor, a mobster's abandoned hideout. Most people would have run for the hills. But to Evelyn, a house that had survived being ripped apart and left for dead felt like a kindred spirit. "I'll take it," she said. Within 2 weeks, Evelyn moved in. She set up a cot in the only room on the ground floor that didn't have a leaking ceiling, brought in a portable generator, and began the grueling work of bringing 742 Bellwether Road back to life. Her days were consumed by physical labor, ripping up moldy carpets, tearing down plaster, and clearing decades of debris. Her hands grew calloused, her nails split, but for the first time in months, she slept soundly. The physical exhaustion overpowered the emotional trauma Henry had left behind. But as the days turned into weeks, the house began to reveal its strange quirks. Evelyn would often wake in the middle of the night to the sound of settling wood that sounded remarkably like footsteps. She found heavy, steel-reinforced doors on ordinary guest bedrooms. And then there was the basement. The door leading down was padlocked from the outside with a heavy rusted iron chain. It took Evelyn 2 days with an angle grinder to finally cut it loose. When she finally descended the wooden stairs, the air turned freezing. The basement was massive, stretching the entire length of the house, filled with rusted tools, broken furniture, and a massive cast-iron boiler that looked like a steampunk nightmare. It was down here that Evelyn's attempt at a quiet, simple life would completely unravel. By her 3rd month in the house, winter was rapidly approaching. Knowing she couldn't survive the Catskill snowstorms with the current heating situation, Evelyn hired a local contractor, a gruff, heavily bearded man named David Corliss, to inspect the plumbing and the old boiler. David was a man of few words, but the moment he stepped into the basement, his demeanor changed. He shined his heavy-duty flashlight along the stone foundation, his jaw tight. "Feds did a number on this place back in the day," David muttered, running his gloved hand over deep gouges in the concrete floor. "They brought in jackhammers, tore up the foundation looking for bodies." Evelyn shivered, wrapping her heavy flannel jacket tighter around herself. "Did they find any?" "No," David said darkly. He walked around to the back of the massive iron boiler and stopped dead in his tracks. He pointed his flashlight at the cinder-block wall behind it, but they didn't look close enough. "Look at this." Evelyn stepped closer. Halfway up the wall, buried in the mortar between the cinder blocks, were 3 distinct, deep holes. Bullet holes. David packed up his tool bag immediately. "I'm sorry, Miss Mercer. I need the work, but I don't mess with bad blood in the soil. My old man told me stories about what Dominic Vetty did to people up here. You couldn't pay me enough to tear into these walls." With that, he walked out, leaving Evelyn completely alone. Frustrated but undeterred, Evelyn decided she would prep the area behind the boiler herself. She bought a heavy sledgehammer, a pry bar, and a set of industrial halogen work lights. That evening, as a heavy rainstorm battered the roof of the mansion, she went down into the freezing basement. She started by measuring the space. Evelyn was no architect, but as she ran her tape measure along the interior basement wall and compared it to the exterior dimensions she had mapped out for the landscaping, something didn't add up. There was a discrepancy. Almost 8 feet of space was missing at the rear of the basement, right behind the boiler. Her heart began to pound. She grabbed the sledgehammer, stepping over the debris, and stood before the wall with the bullet holes. She swung the hammer. Crack! The impact jarred her shoulders, sending a shockwave up her arms. The cinder block chipped, but held firm. Evelyn gritted her teeth, thinking of Henry, thinking of the lawyers who had laughed at her, thinking of the months she had spent, feeling small and powerless. She swung again, harder this time. Crack! The mortar fractured. With a feral yell, she swung a 3rd time. The heavy iron head of the sledgehammer smashed through the center of the block, sending a cascade of grey dust and rubble to the floor. A rush of stale, freezing air poured out from the dark hole she had just created. It smelled of mildew old paper and something metallic. Evelyn dropped the hammer and grabbed her flashlight, shining the beam through the jagged hole. It wasn't dirt behind the wall. It was a room. Trembling, she used the pry bar to clear the rest of the broken blocks, creating a hole just large enough for her to crawl through. She slipped through the jagged opening, tearing her jeans, and stumbled into the darkness. When she clicked on the halogen work light she had dragged through the hole, the space illuminated, stealing the breath from her lungs. It was a windowless concrete bunker. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, untouched by the FBI raids of the 1970s. A moldy leather chair sat behind it. Against the far wall were wooden crates, their lids pried open long ago, filled with rotting, moth-eaten fabrics. But Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the desk. Sitting perfectly in the center was a thick, leather-bound ledger, covered in a thick layer of white dust. Next to it rested a rusted Colt M 1911 pistol and a vintage 1930s Hamilton gold watch. Beneath the desk, half hidden in the shadows, was a heavy iron strong box, secured with a massive, albeit rusted, brass padlock. Evelyn approached the desk slowly, as if the ghost of Dominic Vetty was sitting in the chair. She reached out and opened the ledger. The pages were filled with neat, handwritten columns of dates initials and massive dollar amounts. It was an extortion log. Payoffs, bribes, and loan debts dating from 1971 to 1978. She turned her attention to the strong box on the floor. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She grabbed the heavy pry bar she had brought into the room, wedged it underneath the hoop of the rusted padlock, and threw her entire body weight against the steel bar. The rusted internal pins of the lock snapped with a sharp ping, and the heavy lock clattered to the concrete floor. Evelyn fell to her knees and threw open the lid of the strongbox. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. It was packed to the brim with banded stacks of currency. But they weren't normal bills. They were vintage crisp $1,000 bills currency that had been discontinued by the government in 1969, but remained legal tender. There had to be millions here. But it wasn't the money that made Evelyn's blood run ice cold. Tucked neatly against the side of the box, bound with a brittle rubber band, was a stack of black and white photographs and a sealed manila envelope. Evelyn pulled the photographs out, wiping away the dust. The first picture showed Dominic Vetty sitting at a dimly lit restaurant table. Sitting across from him, shaking his hand, and sliding a briefcase across the table, was a young man in a sharp suit. Evelyn stared at the young man's face. The arrogant smirk, the sharp jawline, the distinct, piercing eyes. She knew that face intimately. She had stared at it across a courtroom just months ago. It was Arthur Hayes, Henry's father, the patriarch of the Hayes family, the man who had built the legal and real estate empire that Henry now controlled. Evelyn tore open the manila envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a property deed dated October 1977, transferring massive tracts of Manhattan real estate from front companies owned by Dominic Vetty directly to Arthur Hayes. Evelyn collapsed back against the cold concrete wall, the breath leaving her lungs in a ragged gasp. Her divorce settlement hadn't been just a string of bad luck or poor legal representation. Her entire marriage had been funded by the blood money of a mafia enforcer, and she had just found the proof that could tear Henry's billionaire empire to the ground. The silence of the subterranean bunker was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of Evelyn's own breathing. She sat on the cold concrete floor, her jeans coated in decades-old dust, staring at the black and white photograph of her former father-in-law. Arthur Hayes had always portrayed himself as a self-made titan of New York real estate, a man of uncompromising ethics and sharp legal acumen. He had built Hayes and Associates from a single storefront office in the Bronx into a multi-billion-dollar empire, paving the way for his son Henry to inherit a kingdom. But the truth was laid bare in Evelyn's trembling hands. The kingdom was built on blood extortion and the quiet erasure of a notorious mob enforcer. Evelyn reached back into the strongbox and pulled out the thick, dust-covered ledger. She carefully turned the brittle pages. Past the columns of loan payments and union bribes near the very back of the book, the accounting stopped. The final few pages were filled with rushed, frantic handwriting. It was a journal entry dated November 12th, 1978, just weeks before Dominic Vetty vanished. The lawyer is getting greedy. The entry read, the ink faded, but legible. Arthur thinks because he wears a suit and files the paperwork, he holds the power. He's quietly transferring the Midtown deeds out of the shell companies and into a trust under his wife's maiden name. He thinks I don't see it. He thinks I'm just a street thug, I've heard whispers he's been talking to the Lucchese bosses, trying to cut me out, telling them I'm skimming. If I go down or if I go away, this box goes to the feds. I'm leaving the Grover Cleveland notes here. Untraceable. My ticket out. But the proof stays in the wall. Evelyn closed the ledger, her mind racing. Arthur Hayes hadn't just laundered money for the mob. He had framed Dominic Vetti, likely orchestrating the hit that made the Ghost disappear forever, allowing Arthur to swallow the real estate portfolio whole. Henry's entire life, his private jets, his Hampton estates, his Ivy League education, and the legal team he had used to crush Evelyn into the dirt was funded by a stolen mafia treasury. A cold, unfamiliar sense of power began to bloom in Evelyn's chest. For months, she had felt like a victim, a discarded wife who wasn't smart enough, wealthy enough, or ruthless enough to survive in Henry's world. But sitting in the freezing basement of a ruined mansion, surrounded by millions of dollars in obsolete currency, and the definitive proof of the Hayes family's criminal genesis, she realized something profound. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the executioner. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She worked under the harsh glare of the halogen lights, hauling the strongbox out of the bunker and hiding it in a hollowed-out section of the floorboards in the master bedroom. She packed the ledger, the photographs, and the property deeds into a waterproof bag. The next morning, she drove into the nearest town, purchased a prepaid burner phone, and made a single phone call. She didn't call the police, and she didn't call the FBI. If she handed this over to the authorities, the evidence would be locked away in evidence lockers for a decade. Henry, with his army of corporate litigators, would tie the investigation up in endless appeals, likely escaping prison, while the government seized all the assets. Evelyn wouldn't see a dime, and she wouldn't get the satisfaction of watching Henry surrender. Instead, she called Jonathan Crane. Jonathan was a senior partner at a rival Manhattan law firm. He was sharp, cynical, and harbored a legendary decade-long vendetta against Henry Hayes after Henry had unethically poached 3 of his biggest corporate clients. Evelyn Mercer. Jonathan's voice came through the cheap speaker of the burner phone, sounding surprised. "I haven't heard your name since the settlement. I heard Henry took you to the cleaners. What can I do for you?" "I need representation, Jonathan. Not for a divorce." Evelyn said, her voice steady, staring out at the snow beginning to fall over the Catskills. "I need representation for a corporate acquisition, and I need someone who wants to see Henry Hayes lose everything he has." There was a long pause on the line. "I'm listening." They met 3 days later at a remote diner in upstate New York, far from the prying eyes of the city. Evelyn slid a thick manila folder across the sticky Formica table, Jonathan wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked wildly out of place in the rural diner, opened it. Evelyn had only provided high-resolution color copies of the documents and photographs, keeping the originals locked in a newly purchased safe, bolted to the foundation of her house. Jonathan adjusted his glasses. As he read through the 1977 property deeds, the extortion ledger copies, and the photograph of Arthur Hayes sitting with Dominic Vetti, the color slowly drained from his face. "Where in the hell did you find this?" Jonathan whispered, looking up at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "In the walls of the house my meager settlement bought me," Evelyn replied smoothly, sipping her black coffee. Arthur Hayes built his empire on stolen mob assets and fraud. He likely had Dominic Vetti murdered to secure the Midtown properties. Those exact properties are currently the crown jewels of Henry's firm. Jonathan tapped his manicured fingers on the table, his legal mind working at light speed. The statute of limitations on any white-collar crime Arthur committed has long expired. But the civil implications... Evelyn, if the federal government sees this, they will invoke the RICO Act. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act doesn't care about time when it comes to the proceeds of crime. The government can and will seize every single asset Henry possesses. His firm, his penthouses, his bank accounts. It will all be liquidated. I know, Evelyn said, leaning forward. But I don't want to destroy him for the government's benefit. I want to destroy him for mine. I want you to draft a new contract, a post-divorce wealth transfer. I want $50 million legally routed through clean offshore trusts paid directly to me. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. And if he refuses? Then you mail the originals to the New York Times, the FBI, and the remnants of the Lucchese crime family, Evelyn said coldly. Henry can deal with the feds taking his money, but let's see how he handles the mob, realizing his father stole their real estate. A slow, predatory smile spread across Jonathan's face. Evelyn, you have become a terrifying woman. I absolutely love it. Let's set the trap. The trap was baited with a single piece of paper. 2 weeks later, a private bonded courier arrived at the sleek glass and steel lobby of Hayes and Associates in Manhattan. He delivered a sealed black envelope directly into the hands of Henry Hayes. Inside was a crisp, high-definition printout of the photograph showing his father, Arthur, shaking hands with Dominic Vetti, the briefcase of cash sitting between them. Clipped to the photograph was a handwritten note, 742 Bellwether Road. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone, or the original goes to the bureau. Evelyn. The following evening, a heavy winter storm battered the Catskills. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, driving sheets of snow against the boarded-up windows of the old Mafia mansion. Evelyn sat in the parlor. She had spent the last 2 weeks restoring this single room. The hardwood floors were polished, the mouldy wallpaper had been stripped and painted a deep, warm crimson, and a roaring fire crackled in the restored marble fireplace. At exactly 8:15 p.m., the glare of halogen headlights pierced the blizzard outside. A sleek black Mercedes G-Wagon tore up the overgrown driveway, coming to an aggressive halt. Evelyn remained seated in a wingback chair by the fire, sipping a glass of expensive Merlot. She heard the heavy thud of the front door being kicked open, followed by the sound of furious, stomping footsteps echoing in the foyer. Henry Hayes stormed into the parlor. He was a handsome man with sharp, aristocratic features and perfectly styled silver fox hair, but tonight he looked unraveled. His expensive cashmere overcoat was dusted with snow, and his face was flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. "What is this?" "Evelyn," Henry snarled, closing the distance between them. He didn't even look at the restored room. His eyes were locked on her. "Have you lost your mind? Blackmail. Do you have any idea what my legal team will do to you? I will have you buried under so many injunctions you won't see daylight for a decade." Evelyn didn't flinch. She took a slow sip of her wine and gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit down, Henry." "I am not sitting down," he roared, slamming his fist onto a nearby antique side table. "Where did you get that photograph? It's a forgery. My father never met Dominic Vetti. It's a cheap AI-generated fake, and I'm going to have you locked up for extortion." "It's not a fake, and you know it," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously calm. She reached into the folder resting on her lap and tossed a copy of the handwritten journal entry onto the coffee table. "Arthur didn't just launder money, Henry. He set Vetti up. He stole the Midtown deeds, transferred them to your mother's trust, and let the mob dispose of the loose end. Your entire life is a fraud." Henry stared at the journal entry. The bluster began to leak out of him. He knew his father's handwriting. He knew the rumors that had always haunted his family's sudden rise to wealth in the late 1970s. "You have nothing but copies," Henry muttered, though his voice lacked its previous venom. "You have no originals, And even if you did, you can't prove a damn thing in court." "I don't have to prove it in court," Evelyn replied, smiling a shark-like grin that she had learned from him. "I just have to show it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They will freeze your assets pending a RICO investigation. Your clients will flee. Your firm will collapse overnight. And if the feds don't get you, I'm sure the grandsons of the men your father cheated will be very interested in the Midtown property records." Henry collapsed into the wingback chair opposite her, staring at the fire. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He was cornered. The brilliant, undefeated litigator had walked right into a checkmate. "What do you want?" he whispered, hoarsely defeated. "I want what I am owed," Evelyn said. She pulled a thick, legally binding contract drafted by Jonathan Crane from her folder and slid it across the table, along with a heavy gold fountain pen. "This is an irrevocable transfer of funds," Evelyn explained, her tone strictly business. $50 million. It will be wired into 3 separate offshore accounts set up by Jonathan Crane. You will also transfer the deed to the Hamptons estate into my name, which I will promptly sell. In exchange, Jonathan, who currently holds all the original documents, the ledger and the photographs in a secure vault, will hand them over to you. The digital footprint will be wiped. You get to keep your firm and you get to keep your freedom." Henry looked at the contract as if it were a venomous snake. $50 million. "You're out of your mind. That will cripple my liquid capital." "Sign it." "Henry or I make the phone call right now," Evelyn said, picking up her burner phone and holding her thumb over the screen. "You have 10 seconds. 10. 9. Wait." Henry gasped, his hands trembling. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her for the first time in years. He saw a woman forged in fire, a woman who had taken the scraps he had thrown her and built an empire of leverage. With a shaking hand, Henry Hayes picked up the gold pen. He uncapped it, pressed it to the paper, and signed his name, officially transferring $50 million to the woman he had tried to destroy. "You're a monster," Henry whispered, dropping the pen. "No," Evelyn corrected, gently, picking up the contract and tucking it safely away. "I'm just a very good student. Get out of my house." 6 months later, 742 Bellwether Road was unrecognizable. The rotting wood and peeling paint were gone, replaced by pristine Victorian architecture, a wraparound mahogany porch and lush manicured gardens. It was a fortress of solitude and luxury. Evelyn Mercer walked through her grand foyer, adjusting a newly acquired piece of modern art on the wall. The $50 million had cleared without a hitch, and Henry's precious Hamptons estate had been sold to a Russian oligarch for an additional $20 million. Henry was still running his firm, forever paranoid, forever looking over his shoulder, knowing that a rival lawyer held a vault of secrets that could end him at any moment. As for the strongbox full of vintage $1,000 Grover, Cleveland notes, Evelyn hadn't touched a single bill. She didn't need to. They remained locked away in a hidden climate-controlled vault she had installed in the basement, right where the old bunker used to be. A reminder of the ghost who had unwittingly saved her life. Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine, walked out onto her pristine porch, and looked out at the rolling Catskill Mountains. She had bought a graveyard, and from its ashes she had built a kingdom. If you were captivated by Evelyn's brilliant revenge and the chilling secrets hidden in the walls of this mafia mansion, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with friends who love a jaw-dropping plot twist, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas and hidden treasure tales. What would you have done with the $1,000 bills? Let me know in the comments below.